Hey, I'm Max and welcome to part 2 of this tutorial. I think this will also be the last part unless I do the neural network part, but at least for the game this is the last part. So in the first part, at the end, we started working on our enemy here, which is basically just a sprite, a rigid body, a collider, and our virus script. Also with isPlayer not checked so it doesn't affect the camera. But when we play we can see the enemy doesn't move or do anything, and also we cannot eat it. So first of all, let's make our enemies move. So for this, I'm going to create a new script. I will call it AI, or you could call it, for example, enemy controller, whatever you want. Then in my AI script, all I have to do is get my cell. So cell, and in start, cell equals to get component cell. So this will get our virus script, but as a cell. I guess you could also get it as a virus if you want. So I guess you could also instead do virus equals to virus like this, but I guess it's the same because I don't think I'm going to use any of the virus functions in the AI, so I guess do that, doesn't matter. Then in here I want to set a random move direction at the start, so I'll do virus.move direction equals to new vector2. So for now I'll do random.range -1 to 1, and I'll simply copy and paste that for the y-axis, and then I need to make sure, since this can be anywhere from -2 to 2 in terms of length, I don't want the virus to have different speed, so I'll do move direction dot normalize. This way I make sure the move direction vector is a unit vector. So I can save this script and then I can come and add it to my enemy right here, AI script. So now when I launch the game, the enemy should move in any random direction. So you can see this time top right, and if I launch again, this time it's bottom left. Okay, so this works, but you can see if I give my player more speed so I can catch up to him, I still cannot eat him. But now at least he's moving and he's also eating bacteria in his path. You can see there's nothing behind him. But I cannot eat him and he cannot eat me, and there's also no limit to the map, so he will just keep moving in one direction. So first let's make it so we can eat each other. So to do this we can just go in our virus script and add a check in our trigger enter for viruses. So virus equals to collision.gameObject.getComponent virus. And also if what we go over is a bacteria, then we don't need to check for virus after. So we can put under here return to make sure it doesn't check for anything else after, because we just confirmed that it was a bacteria. So here we can simply do getComponent virus. If it is a virus, then I want to check which one has the biggest mass. So if my mass is bigger than the virus.mass, then I want to gain mass the other virus.mass. So this will make me gain the mass of the other one. And then I can add a function here, public void die. And we will do this because later we will add more features on die, or at least you could. But for now, I'll just do destroy game object. And when we eat the other virus, we take its mass and then we call the other virus dot die. So this way, the other virus will get deleted. And here you might think to do something like else, make the other virus eat us, but we actually don't need to, because when we overlap another virus, the onTrigger enter 2D will be called on this script and on the other virus's script. So if the other one is bigger, this will just skip over, and then on the other one, this will get triggered. So we don't need to do the else. Now if I go in game, I should be able to eat it if my mass is bigger. So if I catch a few bacteria, I can then eat it. But if I just follow behind him and don't eat anything, it should eat me. So let's see if I just follow behind and try not to eat anything. Okay, now if I go over it, you can see my camera no longer working because my player got deleted. So we will need to add a game over for this instead, but you can see it works. Now let's go in our game script and add a prefab for the enemies. So enemy prefab and enemy count, and we can simply copy and paste this with the enemy count and the enemy prefab. Now if we save this, we can go in our prefab folder and drag in the enemy. So now we have our enemy prefab with the collider, the virus script, and the AI. So we can delete it in our map. And in our game object, on our game script, we can drag in the enemy prefab And the enemy count, let's set it to, let's say 30. And let's see what this looks like. And you can see two problems right now with what I have. Let's start by fixing the first one. You can see as soon as I spawn pretty much on top of an enemy and I get eaten immediately. So obviously this is not fun. You could go in your game object and try to check before if two enemies are one on top of the other, move them a little bit, try to check for collisions. And that would be the more professional way to do this, I guess. But in my case, what I did is simply on trigger enter 2D. I did if time sense level load is less than 1f, then return. So pretty much we cannot eat anything until 1 second after the game has started. So if you spawn on top of an enemy, you have 1 second to move away. That's not a perfect solution, but I guess that's better than nothing. And you can see we have a bunch of enemies and we can eat them. And our map might be a bit small, but you can see the other problem we have is that our enemies just keep moving away. So to do this, again, there are multiple solutions. Some might be better than others. But in my case, before I put the neural network, what I did is simply check on update. If the cell is too far, then move back towards the center. So you can do something like if transform.position.x is smaller than game.mapsize.x and the virus.moveDirection.x is less than 0. So this is pretty much saying if we are at the left edge, moving left, so we are already on the edge and we're moving even further away, then we want to flip our x direction. So we want to do virus.moveDirection.x times equal -1. Or if you prefer, you could also change every direction, because if you do this, this will just make it bounce on the edge and not really change direction. So you might prefer instead to do something like 0 to 1 to make sure it goes to the left. And then we can simply add checks for other edges. So copy and paste the if. And for this one, I'm going to do greater than map size x and move direction greater than 0. And if so, I want to go between -1 and 0. And I can copy and paste both of these with a else for dy. And for dy, I need to change x to y, x to y, x to y. Here I can do -1 to 1 and change dy. In this case, dy is too small, so 0 to 1. And then the next one, y, y, y. Here I can do -1 to 1. And here -1 to 0. So this might not be a perfect solution, but I think it works pretty good. And you can see when they move to the edge, they stop. But you can see sometimes they kind of stop moving, like this one is not moving at all. And that's because we forgot to do the normalize after. So here I can just put normalize at the end. Also, I want to make the map a bit bigger. I think it's pretty small. Let's do 150, 150. And I will also need to make my background bigger, because otherwise I'm going to reach the edge. So my background, I'll do it, say 200 by 200. So this way I make sure it's big enough. You can see my map is quite a bit bigger. It's actually pretty good. And you can see when they reach the edge, they kind of stop. So they all seem to go to the top right. So maybe I did something wrong here. Let's see. Okay, so I found why the enemies were always going to the top right. And it's because here I did smaller than map size x. But I need to do smaller than minus map size x because it's the negative. And the same thing for y minus here. So now if I play the game and go into my scene, I should be able to see a bunch of enemies bouncing on the edges and going in random directions. So this seems to work perfectly. That's good. The only thing is our player. You can see that our player still goes off the map. So for our player, I think we could use the same kind of technique. But we don't want to add the AI script to our player because that controls only our AIs. So I guess we could copy and paste this into instead our virus script. Or even better than that, since later we will have other cells that move around and we also want them to bounce. Instead of putting this in the AI script, we can simply move it into our cell script right before the update velocity. Then we can remove all of the virus dot. Just like this, remove all the virus dot because now we are into our cell class. And in my case, I will also remove the prints I did to test earlier why the bounce was not working. And so now in our cell class we have this, which will check if we are going off the edge, and if so, change our direction. And so now all of our cells should no longer be able to leave the map area, because if we are going off the map, our velocity is going to be changed. So even the player should no longer be able to go off the map. Let's try. You see, even the player gets bounced back. So if I move my mouse constantly, I get stuck on the edge. So this is working fine, and later when we add other cells, they will automatically bounce on the edge as well. So I guess let's do that right now. The next cell I want to add is the red cell. So I'll do create, script, and then call it red cell. Make the red cell a child of the cell, which will make it move and also bounce on the edge now that we have this. In the start, I want to do kind of like the bacteria, have a random scale and rotation. But I also want this one to turn around, so I need to change the rigid body angular velocity. But if I do RB, you can see it's not here, because in my cell it is not public, so it's private. So I can just put public before, and now I can go back in my red cell and do RB.angular velocity equals to random.range, and I'll do it, say 10f to 50f. So this will just make it spin. It looks a lot better when it spins than just when it's moving around. I guess you could also add this to viruses if you wanted to make them turn around. But in my case, I prefer to just do it on the red cell. And I will also give it a random initial velocity like I did in the AI. So I can just copy and paste this right here. Move direction equals to new vector2 random -1 1 -1 1. But we don't need the virus dot before, because in our case we are already a cell, so we already have move direction. We don't need to get the cell like we did in AI. So now we can go back in our game. We can drag in the map our red cell. We can add to it a rigid body 2D and also a circle collider. Make it a trigger and also change the size if you want, maybe a little bit the radius. And finally add to it the red cell. I will give it a speed of, let's say 8 and a mass of like 1. So now if I hit play, my red cell should move around, and then you can drag in the red cell itself for the rigid body. So now if I just move my red cell right here so I can see it better, if I hit play I should see it move and turn around. And there you go, it's moving and it's turning around. But now we can go in our prefab, drag in our red cell as a prefab, delete it, and you probably guessed it, we need to go add it as a game prefab. So red cell prefab and red cell count, and then we could copy and paste this again to change the prefab, or we could actually stop copy and pasting the same code again and use a function. So void spawn entity, or whatever you want to call it, then I'll pass a game object prefab and a int count. Then I can simply copy and paste this right here, spawn our prefab, and for the count, count. And then here we can, instead of doing this copy paste over and over, we can do spawn entity, bacteria prefab, bacteria count, spawn entity, enemy prefab, enemy count, and finally spawn entity, red cell prefab, red cell count. And we can delete this. So this is a lot cleaner, and when we want to add more things, we just have to copy and paste this function instead of everything. So now once again, the game object, game script, red cell prefab, red cell count, let's do 100. And we should see a bunch of red cells moving around. And there you go, it works. You can see we cannot eat them though. Okay, so the reason why our red cell was not moving is simply because the update was not getting called. And that's because when we make a child of a mono behavior, now these functions are going to be called, but the parents one are no longer going to be called. So to fix this, you could do something like a public virtual void here, and then in the red cell do base.update to call the parent. Just like this would call the parent, so now both of these would be called. But this is pretty complicated and there's really no need for it because we don't need the update function at all. So if we just remove it and leave everything else as it was, simply removing the update function will make it so the parents one will be called. So now if we hit play, the red cells should move around just as expected, and you can see they do. and we cannot eat them yet. And if we look at the scene, we can see when they reach the edge, they simply bounce in a random direction. So that's perfect. Now let's make it so we can eat them. So we can simply go in our virus script again. We can simply copy and paste this, but change virus for red cell, red cell, red cell, and here we can simply copy and paste red cell just like this. And we can do the same thing for virus, add a return if we detected one. And now if it is indeed a red cell that we collided with, then we want to gain mass the red cell dot mass, and we want to destroy red cell dot game object. So we will eat it and destroy it. And now whenever we go over a red cell, we should be able to eat it and grow. So let's see, this works, and it worked again. So we don't grow that much. Maybe I should give the red cell a bit more mass. So a good thing, since we use the red cell's mass, we can simply increase it here, and it will give us more mass when we eat it. So just like that. Okay, that thing that's pretty big. That's a pretty significant increase for each. I also think the red cells are a bit big, so I will open the prefab and simply scale it down. So maybe 0.5, 0.5. And yep, this is pretty good to me. So now I can go around and eat some red cells. And the enemies should also be able to eat some. So you can see they just ate some. That's good. Now you can see the enemies are all red. That's pretty boring. In my video I had random colors. So let's quickly do this as well. And this will actually require me to do what I said earlier with the virtual, which is kind of a pain, but let's do it. So if I do void start, which is the Unity start function, and I do inside of here get component sprite renderer dot color equals to new color random dot range 0 to 1, and I copy and paste this 3 times. Or actually 0 to 1, you have a chance to get 0, 0, 0 or close to it, which would be pitch black, which is not that good. So maybe 0.4 to 1 for all 3 of the color ones. So this will give you a random color. But if we do this, you can see now the enemies have a random color, but you can also see they're falling through the map, and you get an error that the rigid body has not been found. So you could fix this just by opening up enemy and then dragging in the rigid body, but let's stop doing workarounds. First of all, here I forgot, for the virus, only if it is not a player I want to change the color, because the player I want him to stay green. If you don't, then don't do this. And finally we want to go in our cell, and here we get the rigid body, and this did not get called because we override the function here. And this is pretty much what I was saying earlier with update 2. So let's do it now. Public virtual void, and virtual means we can override it in the child classes, and in the virus child class we can simply do public override void start. So here we override this virtual method here, and to call the parent one we just have to do base.start like so. So if this works, we should have the change of color and the getting of the rigid body. And also I forgot, we need to do this for our red cell as well. So go in the red cell and do public override and call the base.start right here. So if you want to have a custom update function on your red cell or whatever, you could also set the update as virtual and call the base one. So now we should have the random color and the velocities, and it looks like it worked. We have a bunch of random colors. Yay, that's good. One last thing you could do is add a new script for the white blood cells, which are things that defeat viruses in the body. So if you didn't get it yet, this is like a body simulation, I guess. Now for the white cells, I guess it's pretty similar to the red cells. So I'll just go in my red cell, copy and paste the start function, including the public override because we needed to. And let's not forget to make it a child of cell. The only thing I will change is, instead of putting a local scale increase, I will add a gain mass function. So void gain mass float amount. In here I will do mass plus equal amount. and also increase my transform.local scale by a new vector 3 of the amount divided by 10, the amount divided by 10 on y2, and for z 0, that's okay. So pretty much when we gain mass, we want to increase the size, and at the start, instead of growing simply the scale, I will do gain mass random.range, and let's do it, say 1 to 5. So this will grow our mass and our size. So this way the player can kind of see which one has the bigger mass. And the reason for that is because when we go in virus, we add once again a check. So we can add a return here, and we can add a check for the white cell. So white cell and a white cell, get component white cell. If there is a white cell that we collided with, then in my game what I did is reduce mass. So I didn't do that yet. So for the reduce mass, I'll simply copy and paste this. I'll do reduce mass, mass minus amount, scale minus this, and if it is a player, we set the camera again. And also I noticed that at the start, the camera was not the right size, so let's add it at the start as well. Now when we collide with the white cell, we want to do reduce mass, and in my game I did 0.5, but you can change it to whatever you want. And actually we cannot do this on trigger enter 2D because in my game I made it slowly go down, but on trigger enter 2D it only triggers at once. So we need to do private on trigger stay 2D, which will call it every tick as long as we are over the white cell. I will copy and paste my time sense level load in case you spawn on a white cell, and here I will copy and paste this here instead. So this is for the things that when you collide on it, something happens once, and this is for as long as you stay on it, your mass gets reduced. And I also need to call reduce mass on the white cell too, but I haven't done it yet, so let's do this. Public void reduce mass float amount. You probably guessed it, I can copy and paste this, minus and minus. And I can simply add if the mass is less than 0. Then I want to destroy the game object. And now in my virus, I simply have to call white cell.reduce mass 0.5. So basically, as long as you stay in the trigger of the white cell, every tick you and the white cell both lose 0.5, and then whichever runs out of mass first dies. So I actually forgot to do this for the player too. So if mass becomes less than 0, then I want to call die. So this is the way I did it, but if you want, you could also just do it so on trigger enter 2D, when you hit a white cell, you die. If that's what you want to do, feel free. Okay, so now all we have left to do is to drag in our white cell sprite. Maybe increase the size a little bit, let's say 2 and 2, okay. Then we can add the rigid body 2D. Then add the circle collider, maybe reduce a little bit the radius, set it as is trigger, add the white cell script, speed of let's say 5, and a mass of let's say 15 to start. So now you can see it is right here, and if I go on it, we both shrink down. But you can see in my case, my camera is not doing very good. I need to adjust the numbers on my camera, but I won't spend too much time on it because it's just a tutorial, so you set it to whatever you want. So something like this should be fine. So now that I increase my camera size, you can see now it no longer goes all small when I go on a white cell, but my virus still shrinks down. I guess I could make it shrink a little bit more. So if you want to see the new numbers for the cameras, this is what I used, mass divided by 2 plus 6.5. And for the white cells, I guess I could make the gain mass at the start between like 5 and 10. So this way they will be a little bit bigger and also take more mass when you go into it. So now at the start, if I go in a white cell, I should lose about half my mass. So you can see it's quite a shrink down. If I run out of mass before the white cell, I actually am the one who dies. So that's great, everything is working fine. Obviously you can adjust the values however you want. One last thing we need is the game over, because you can see when I died, it just froze the game. So here I'll do in my game script public void game over, and in here for now I'll just reload the scene, but obviously you can add a menu whatever you want. So I'll just do unity engine.scene management, and here I'll do scene manager.load scene 0. Now I need to call this, so I will call this in my virus script. In the die function I will do if the virus is a player, so if the player died, I will directly go find object of type game dot game over. Just like this, the game is over if the player dies. If it is not the player who died, then I will do virus array viruses equals to find objects with an S of type virus. So check how many viruses are still alive. If viruses dot length, so the amount of viruses is smaller than or equal to 1, so if only the player is left, then I also need to call game over. So here if you wanted to, you could also do, for example, a bool player 1, and you could do some effects if the player won or not, and here you can simply call false because the player died, and here true because the player is the last one alive. So in my case I didn't do anything with the bool, but you can do whatever you want. And so now if I play the game and I die, it should restart the game. So let's try, and there you go, the game just restarted. And if I go die again, it restarted. And if instead I try to win, so let's say I try to play seriously and I try to win, it's actually pretty hard to play. And let's see if I can win this game and show what happens. And it should restart the game as soon as we eat this one, because we will be the last one alive. Actually, now that I realize it, it's smaller than or equal to 0, because this destroy here actually takes like a frame or two to happen, so it will not go down to 1 immediately. So we can just do smaller than or equal to 0. I'll make my background a bit bigger just to make sure I don't see the edge. And I'll try to win again to be able to see if the game restarts when I win. This one should make the game restart, and there you go. So when I die or when I win, the game restarts. Obviously you can do a main menu or whatever else you like, maybe different levels. And of course you can add a better AI for the enemies, like you can make them check if there's a red cell near them and go towards it. Or if there's an enemy near them, if the enemy is smaller than them, then they can go towards it. And if it's bigger, then they run away, things like that. And the game should restart, there you go. So this is actually a nice little game, maybe with a better enemy AI than just randomly moving around would be better. We can do just a little thing to make it just a little better for now. In our AI script, in the update, we can add a timer that will change the move direction randomly. So we can do, for example, float the change direction timer. At the start we can set it to equal to time.time plus, let's say, 5.0. And here in update we can do if change direction timer is greater than time.time. Then we can randomly change the direction and normalize it again. And then we can set back the timer to time.time plus, and this time we could do a random.range, so it doesn't always change after 5 seconds. So let's say 3 seconds to 6 seconds. So just random.range is good. 3 to 6, so it will change every 3 to 6 seconds randomly direction. So this might make it just a little bit more interesting, but if you want, feel free to make a better AI that checks for other cells around and things like that. So let's see if it works. So you can see it does not work. And that is simply because in the change direction timer, we need to do smaller than and not greater than. So let's say the time is 5, we set our timer to, let's say, 8. So our change direction timer is going to be greater than time because 8 is greater than 5. And then once we reach the 8 with the time, then it will set a new timer. So like this, it should actually work and change direction every few seconds. So now let's see if it works, and we can see the virus here is moving to the right. And it should change direction, and there you go, it just did. So this is not that interesting, but I guess it's a bit better than before when they never change direction. So you can see also they should not change direction at the same time. So the one on the right is not changing there. Oh, it just did, and you can see the other ones did not. So I guess it's a little bit more interesting this way. So I guess that's it for this tutorial. Hopefully you enjoyed. Feel free to add more features and make an interesting game from this base. Hopefully this was helpful to you and you learned a few things. Feel free to subscribe to my channel if you like game dev content.